The land down under has never been easier to reach. United Airlines has more flights between the U.S. and Australia than any other U.S. airline, so you can fly nonstop to destinations like Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. Explore dazzling cities, savor the very best of Aussie cuisine, and get up close and personal with the wildlife. Who doesn't want to hold a koala? Go to united.com/Australia to book your adventure.
This episode is brought to you by Experian. Are you paying for subscriptions you don't use, but can't find the time or energy to cancel them? Experian could cancel unwanted subscriptions for you, saving you an average of $270 per year and plenty of time. Download the Experian app. Results will vary. Not all subscriptions are eligible. Savings are not guaranteed. Paid membership with connected payment account required.
In 2019, directors Anthony and Joe Russo and star Robert Downey Jr. gave the world a climactic and heartfelt ending to an epic chapter of cinematic history.
In 2024, we try a whiskey whose name is as synonymous with bourbon as the Avengers are with superheroes.
The film is Avengers Endgame.
The whiskey is Jim Beam.
We'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
Shum bum bum bum.
And I am Iron Man.
Yeah, there it is. I think I always kind of identified a little more with Thor.
Just drinking beer.
Yeah. Got that beer belly going
I'm
on.
definitely in that phase of life now. I think I definitely identify with Thor. Well, hey, Brad G., since you didn't introduce yourself, let me say hello to the people on your behalf. And let me also say, welcome in, Film and Whiskey Nation, to the last episode of Season 8 of Film and Whiskey.
Bob, I know you're not super excited for today's episode, but I don't think we've ever had a season-ending episode that feels quite as appropriate as Avengers Endgame.
Yeah, end is right in the title.
It's right there, man.
You know what? I don't know how to explain this, but there's something that just made me feel so American about our intro to the podcast this week. Because usually we have to say, like, today's whiskey is Jim Beam, finished in rosé casks with a hint of honey. And then today was just like, the movie's Avengers Endgame, the whiskey's Jim Beam. Get on board or get out. Like,
we're drinking something out of a jar that has a skull and crossbones on it.
3 X's on it. So, folks, welcome into Film and Whiskey. What we do on this podcast is review a movie, and while we do that, we drink and review a new whiskey each week. This season of the podcast, we've been looking at the highest-grossing film of each year from 1988 to 2019. So we have finally arrived, Brad. It has been a long journey from Rain Man to Avengers Endgame. And I have to say, I think that Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise are the only 2 actors in Hollywood that do not make an appearance in Avengers Endgame. So it's pretty fitting, you know?
Yeah, it is incredible to think that we started with, Rain Man to Endgame. If you were to just pair those 2 movies together in a Let's Make It a Double, that would be a really strange night of cinema.
I don't really particularly care for Rain Man that much. Like, it was a good movie. I don't really understand why it won Best Picture. But there is something about holding up Avengers Endgame as the movie that people wanted to see in 2019. For all its merits, you know, like, it's a fun movie. It's got a huge spectacle to it. Versus a movie like Rain Man. And it just seems like we're the 1980s were such a more sophisticated time. Like, people wanted to go see this small, intimate drama versus, you know, a guy with a big purple nutsack for a chin.
We're going there already.
Oh, man, I'm coming in hot today. Listen, I sat down. I've got my can of PBR and I've got half of a donut. I'm ready to go, man.
Dude, you are full on off-duty cop mode.
No, I'm Thor.
Who also, fun fact, didn't seem to care about anything in this movie, and I'm guessing that you don't either, Bob.
I really do, and I really don't. You know, I've been thinking about this movie a lot, Brad, and I'm going to have some spicy takes, and I'm probably going to piss some people off, but it's an appropriate time to review this movie because it is the 5th year anniversary of this film. I can't believe it's been 5 years, but then COVID really threw things off, and it feels both like only a few minutes since this movie came out and like an eternity. But 5 years is enough time for me to kind of sit and ruminate and revisit. And this time around, Brad, you know, we reviewed Black Panther last week. I did not go back and watch Avengers Infinity War, which is the immediate precursor to this movie, and a film that I liked significantly better than Endgame the first time I saw them both. And so I really tried to watch this film in as much of a vacuum as possible, because this is a movie that, quite frankly, you just can't divorce from the 21 MCU movies that preceded it. And I think that's maybe my biggest issue with the movie, is that just taken on its own as a movie, it's got some weird stuff going on to it. I'm not saying it doesn't totally work, but it doesn't feel like a complete movie as much as it feels like you've watched a whole season of TV and then you get the little previously on the Avengers and then you go right into that. And so it's like, it's jarring. I have many thoughts. Brad, stop me before I rant for too long.
It's curious to me. I think I'm just going to push back and say, if there's ever a movie that deserves to be judged not just on its own merits, but on the merits of what came before it, I think this is the movie, Bob. Like you can't just judge this movie in a vacuum. Endgame will never exist in a vacuum. Like, tell me, of the, 100% of people who have watched Avengers Endgame, what percentage of those people
it was their first watch?
Seen,
had
never seen another Marvel movie?
Yeah, you're right. And I get it. But I mean, we can make that argument for the closing chapter of any cinematic saga. This could be the same for Harry Potter 8 or Lord of the Rings 3 or Return of the Jedi. You know, there has to be some
Lord of the Rings 3.
Gollum's Revenge.
I believe it was called Return of the King. I could be wrong.
I was going to keep numbering.
It might have been Lord of the Rings 3.
I was going to keep numbering things, and then I was just like, I'll go just throw in Return of the Jedi. My point was going to be, yes, there has to be some familiarity with the preceding material, and you can't just be plopped in. I completely get that, and I agree with it. But I feel like this movie really leans on that, and perhaps too much. You know, there does have to be some extent to which in every movie you give the characters a proper reintroduction. And I think in this movie, they try to do that. You know, like Ant-Man comes back from the quantum realm and we see Thor for the first time in 5 years. We really do see each character grappling with this thing that happened 5 years prior. But
I love when you set up a point and then like refute it yourself. It's what I don't even have to do anything. I'm just sitting back here like smoking a cigar.
As you should. I think this movie tries, is what I'm saying. It just falls short for me in so many areas, Brad. And I think, oh gosh, how many weeks ago was it now that I was talking about Transformers? And I said that I sat through 2/3 of that movie thinking to myself, I not only don't exist on the same wavelength as this film, but I actively hate this movie. Brad, Avengers Endgame, for the first 2 hours plus, I was like, I hate everything about this movie. I hate the acting. I hate the cinematography.
You don't like time heists?
I hate time heists. I hate everyone that ever touched this thing. I hate what it did to cinema. And then the last hour, delightful. So I am in a really weird, conflicted spot on this movie, dude.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it helps you out at all, Bob, but for me, the first time watching Endgame was a fun experience. So my first experience watching Avengers Endgame was somewhat amusing almost, Bob. I'm sure I've told the crying patron sitting behind me story before.
Oh, I don't remember that. Please enlighten me.
So I sit down at Avengers Endgame at our local, like really small theater. And so we sit down to watch the film, really excited. And, 10 minutes in, there's a guy sitting behind me and he's kind of whispering to his friend. And it's like not loud enough to make me say something, but it's loud enough for me to be like thinking to myself, like, people have waited like 12 years for this, man. You should probably shut up. And he keeps kind of whispering here and there throughout the first half of the film. And I was getting a little more and more annoyed, and I almost turned around and said something to him a few times. We hit the halfway point of this movie, or, 2/3, whatever it happens, when everybody starts coming back to life. This man behind me, who has been whispering through the whole movie, starts sobbing. I mean, ugly weep crying.
What?
And he doesn't stop until the end of the film.
What?
And I was like, oh, you're the guy who's been waiting 12 years for this movie.
Oh.
It was one of the most wild experiences of my life. Needless to say, I also wanted to talk through the entire movie, and so on Monday the next week, Steven Jordan and I went and saw it like 10 a.m. matinee. It was the three of us, like kind of near the front left of the theater, and then like two people way in the back right. And so we just kind of watched it and talked about things, and honestly enjoyed the movie in the way that we would want to enjoy it, which was kind of making fun of it, kind of enjoying it, kind of just reminiscing about the 10 years. And it was a good experience.
That sounds like a fun way to watch this movie. And before we go any further, because we do need to get to Brad Explains, I am going to get up on my soapbox for the next minute and a half, Brad, and I'm going to say this about people talking in movie theaters. Bring back public shaming.
Yes.
Here's the thing. I have no qualms about telling people to shut the f*** up in movies. And I will say those words out loud. I went to see Inside Out 2 with my kid a couple weeks ago. Did I tell this story already? I don't know.
No.
I'm sitting there with my son, and it got to the most emotional part of the movie. And these people in the 2 rows behind us in the back row were snickering and like making fun of the movie. And everyone else in the movie is like trying to enjoy the movie. And it's quiet enough in the theater that everyone can hear these people.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep looking back.
This isn't like, Hobbit, Legolas being Mario, and me losing my mind laughing.
You came to this movie to make fun of the movie, which pisses me off. So I turn around and loudly say, "Can you please stop talking?" And then they think that's funny. So then I said, "Stay here a minute, son." And I stand up and I walk back into their row, whereupon I see that they are small, scrawny teenagers. Because I took a gamble that this person may just be a large man with a gun. But, this time around, it was teenagers. And I stood over both of them. And I just said, "That's enough." And then they shut up for the rest of the movie. It was great. I got my dad voice on. I publicly shamed some teenagers. And I don't feel one bit bad about it. People need to shut up in movie theaters, Brad.
Yeah, I experienced the other end of that while watching Dune 2.
No, Brad, stop talking in movies, dude.
No, here's the deal. Not even during the movie. It was before the movie starts, they give the things. The not trailers,
the studio cards.
Production, the production studio things. During that, I lean over and no joke, I'm making out with Steven's ear, whisper in his ear something, and this dude 2 seats down from me screams. And when I say scream, I mean screams. "Shut the up, you piece of shit."
Yes.
And
that's my dude right there.
I just looked over
that's my
and
dude.
Was like, I was ready to fight, man.
I'm on team guy.
This movie hasn't started.
That was me, Brad.
I
said that
very quietly, talking to my neighbor, and I didn't say anything the entire movie. But this guy just thought he was, better than everyone else.
That was me. You know what? Co-sign that guy.
That guy was a dick.
I have thought back to the number of times
you were kind of a dick too.
But here's the thing. I really don't feel bad about it. I spent so much money to take the 2 of us to the movies. And if people are going to purposely try to ruin the movie, they deserve to be told to shut up. And seriously, I would never do that to you in that situation, Brad. And that it had gone on for an hour at that point.
Yes.
But I do think like the pandemic has ruined theater etiquette for people. It's the amount of people I see with their feet up on the seats, with no shoes on, like talking through the movie, phone on full brightness. It's just like, if you want to be in your living room, stay home. Like there just has to be a different way you act in a place like this. And that's, that's my soapbox.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, man. In general, I am a don't talk during movies person. There are people I don't enjoy watching movies with because they constantly ask questions throughout the entire movie. Questions that involve answers that you have to wait to see because, like, we're watching the same movie and I don't know the answer.
Is he going to die?
Yep, 100%. But I will say, like, my second experience watching Endgame, like, if I'm with just my friends and there's nobody else in the theater and we want to talk during the movie, I'm going to do that.
Yeah, 100%.
So,
okay, on that note, let's talk about this movie. And this movie is called Avengers Endgame. And that means that it is time for Brad to break down the plot of this movie. In the first segment of the day, Brad explains.
Brad's gonna give us the movie plot with only 60 seconds ticking on the clock. So let's go ahead and hear your take with this little segment that we call Brad Explains.
Brad, as you know, you get 60 seconds on the clock to break down the plot of this movie with full spoilers. So, folks, if you have somehow avoided seeing what was at one time the highest grossing film of all time, you can hit pause here. You can come rejoin this episode after you've watched the 3-hour-long superhero movie.
Credits roll at 2 hours and 50 minutes, Bob.
Okay. All right, fair.
Just saying.
250.
250.
Brad, you get 1 minute on the clock and go.
Avengers Endgame is a film about the Avengers. Bet you never saw that coming, did you, Bob?
I sure did.
Terrible thing, though, half of everybody is dead. We follow the Avengers as they try to cope with the loss of their friends and family. The Ant-Man comes back and tries to convince everyone that time travel could be a thing. Tony Stark is like, F you, I already have everything I want, and I'm not going to risk it all. But then he does, and they go on a time travel heist, and they steal the Infinity Stones from the past. They come back to the future, snap half of the population back into existence, but they unfortunately bring a past version of Thanos back to the future. See what I did there? Thanos tries to destroy everyone instead of just half of everyone, and Tony Stark stops him along with a little bit of help from his friends. He snaps Thanos and his armies out of existence, and then he's dead.
And he did. All right.
Dead.
And that is Avengers Endgame. Also, Captain America
baby.
Goes back to the 40s so that he can get some of that Agent Carter booty.
I mean,
Bradley, you are a married man, sir.
I'm not saying I would do that.
Yeah, Brad explains adultery.
I'm just saying, if I was Captain America in that situation, come on.
Can you imagine what a great line it would be to be like, I traveled across space and time and unfroze myself to be here for you, Peggy?
Dude, let's go.
Let's be honest. I am a straight male. If Captain America showed up at my door and said that, I would throw myself at the man. I'm just being honest here. I mean, what greater story for anyone to say, I could have had any number of women in 2019, and I came back here to 1944 to be with you, Peggy.
For Beer Belly Bob.
Dude, I would have slayed in the 1940s. Don't even give me that crap. I have all my teeth. Okay, let's talk about the movie, Brad. And typically we start by talking about the cast list of the movie. The issue is that is that, as I said, everyone in Hollywood is in this movie at some point. So we will certainly talk about the cast. I just feel like it might end up being in a more roundabout way today. We'll talk about people kind of as they come up instead of just reading down a list of 40 A-list stars. Where I'd like to begin is with the actual plot of this movie. Brad, we have done a number of time-traveling movies on this podcast, and I like a good time travel movie. Perhaps the most controversial one that we've done is Back to the Future, a movie that is considered structurally perfect, but that neither one of us found to be super compelling. If you'd like to go back and listen to our hot takes on Back to the Future, man, that was like season 2 or 3, I think. Yeah, that was a long time ago.
I think it was also the last episode of a season.
It sure was.
Yeah.
It sure was. I keep doing this to myself. So with Endgame, I think my big thing with the time travel piece of it is that just as a story plot, not plot device, but like the determining factor of a plot, it feels to me, even on watching it this time, like the biggest possible cop-out to end such a huge arc. Like, they wrote themselves into such a corner with the way that Thanos snapped everybody out of existence at the end of Infinity War. And folks, let me say, for you Marvel aficionados out there, I am aware of the Infinity Gauntlet saga. Like, I am aware that all of these stories were pre-existing in some capacity or some form or another. So nothing new under the sun when it comes to the MCU. But I was really interested to see how they were going to find a way to bring people back. And it turns out that they have screwed up so badly as the Avengers that they're like, we have to find a way to go back in time. And as soon as that element gets introduced for me, the eye rolls and groans just start, because it really does just seem like if we can undo everything that happened, then what have I been doing for 20 movies here? And I don't think for me, the movie ever fully recovers from the idea that we have to introduce time travel into this thing. It's something that's never even been remotely hinted at in the MCU outside of the Ant-Man kind of teasing it thing. But like, A, no one saw Ant-Man. And B, like it just, for something that has required so much suspension of disbelief, going to space and other planets and demigods, like, I don't know. For me, time travel was just a bridge too far. It was the thing that finally broke the camel's back for me.
Bob, I know that it's no $1 billion take. Ant-Man did make $520 million.
Nah.
So, a few people saw it.
A few. Did anybody that you know go to the theater to see Ant-Man?
Yeah, I had a few friends who were Marvel stans. They went to all of them.
Mm.
I have never seen Ant-Man.
Yeah, F that movie. I'm on one today, dude. I'm eating my donut.
Dude.
I'm ready to be over with this.
Are you eating a filled Long John?
I certainly am. I certainly am, man.
Of course you are.
It's really fat. Like, this is a fat donut. I'm not a fan of this one. It's a filled Long John that has both cream and jelly inside of it.
Oh.
Yeah, this is like a diabetes stick. Yeah.
Fun fact, you do have diabetes, Bob.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you should be eating that.
You can't get diabetes if you already have it, Brad.
Bro, you said that
with a mouthful of donut.
Perfect amount of bite to let everyone know. That might be the fattest sentence you've ever spoken in your life.
Listen, dude, respond to the time travel thing so I can finish my donut.
I think that the time travel is poorly implemented.
Yes.
But I don't mind it a ton because there's no precedent within the Marvel universe that they're screwing up.
Mm.
Where I'm like, it's not my favorite time travel that I've ever seen in a film. It probably ranks pretty lowly. But the one thing I like about it is that they don't make a big deal of it by like continuing to talk about it. They get it out of the way in their own Marvel way that, War Machine and Ant-Man are like, yeah, why do we think time works that way? Because of Back to the Future, RoboCop, blah, blah, blah. And like, they get it out of the way. Hulk explains Marvel's version of time travel, and then they move on with it. And like, yes, they do the time travel thing, but they don't talk about it a ton. And I think that's why I don't mind it a lot, even though it's not my favorite.
I'm developing a theory in real time, so let me workshop it here. But,
ooh.
I mean, you would say that this is not a perfect film, right? There are definitely flaws to it.
Yeah, yes, 100%.
I'm realizing to me at least, the moments of the film that work are all of the payoff moments, and almost all of the moments that don't work are the build-up moments. And so I think that applies like on a meta scale to the whole movie. Like the first 2 hours are just not as successful as the last hour is. But I also think when you take the time travel subplot, the way they set up the time travel is it's like nails on a chalkboard in terms of storytelling. It's like they are constantly undercutting their own decision to do time travel by trying to show you, the audience, that they know it's ridiculous and be a little winking and tongue in cheek and say like, this is laughable. At one point, Tony Stark says, this is laughable. And it's like, you can't tell your audience that it's laughable and then do it anyway, you know, like, and so for me, every time they do that, it undercuts the seriousness of what they're trying to do, but also it's making it harder for the payoff to actually overcome that. And I think, to the movie's credit, there are a number of places where the payoff does overcome the buildup. And the time travel thing is one of them. Like, once they actually go back in time, they get some really great sequences out of it. I love the sequence where Tony meets his own dad. And it's partially because Robert Downey Jr. is such a good actor. And he sells a lot of those moments with stuff that's not actually on the page, but just his own emotional reaction to things that are happening.
It's incredible.
It's really, really well done. You know, the Captain America fighting himself. What a fun little moment. And then when they're in the lobby of that building and RDJ is dressed up as like a SWAT team guy and Loki's having fun with the Tesseract, it's a freaking blast. Like that, all that stuff is really fun.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like everything that's happening to set that up is either so, you know, gloomy and dour, or too flippant. And they never really find the right balance of like what's happening in 2019. And so it's not until they go back in time at like the hour and a half mark that I really start caring about anything in this movie.
So it feels like for you, a stand-up comedian that just kind of botches all of his setups. And you're like, yeah, maybe the joke could have landed, but here we are.
But then he says, you might be a redneck. And we go, oh, you did it.
You did the thing.
I get it now.
I think as I was watching this, I realized that the thing I hate about Marvel humor, about Marvel plot construction, about Marvel aesthetics in movies is when it gets imitated by non-Marvel movies. And here in Endgame, at least, I was like, oh, this movie wouldn't feel right if it was suddenly like directed by Steven Spielberg or, like a Wes Anderson, or it would just feel completely wrong if all of a sudden it had a super tight script. Its humor was actually like, what's it called? Diegetic music is music playing within the film.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like if it was actually diegetic humor and not Marvel humor, like it wouldn't feel right. Like there's a level of, this movie is the culmination of everything Marvel has built itself to be. And yes, there are parts of that I don't like, and that's why I'm not going to give this a perfect score. But I don't know what it was, man. For some reason, this time through, none of that really bothered me that much. I found myself able to just sit back, enjoy the movie for what it was. The setup, I'm with you, is not perfect, not well done. I think that the Russo brothers faced such a difficult task of like, how are we going to get to this epic conclusion?
Mm-hmm.
And figuring out time travel couldn't take up any more time than it did. Because I remember the first time I watched this, I was like, Tony literally says, I won't do it for you. There's like a 2-minute scene, and then he's like, I figured it out. I did time travel, baby.
He literally asks his computer one question, and it's like, oh yeah. Here's time travel.
Yeah. And like this time through, I was kind of like, sure, yep, we got time travel. Let's just move on to the next thing.
For sure.
Get that out of the way.
But then there's so many moments that are like unreasonably drawn out. And I'm not even talking about plot developments, but that Marvel humor. There's a moment where they first go to kind of recruit Hulk, and they're sitting in a diner, and Ant-Man is asking these kids if they want to take a picture of him. And Brad, I swear, I had like a Brad G moment where I thought the joke was over, and then they kept going. And they kept going.
You felt that pit in your stomach.
Oh my gosh. And it made me angry by the end of it. It was like,
yep.
I'm cool with them letting these guys ad lib and improv and kind of riff off each other. But as an editor, you have to know where to end that. And that joke stopped being funny. And it didn't go on long enough to come back around and be funny again. They found the maximum level of frustration to end that scene on. And so that's where it's like, there's a number of rhythmic things with this movie that, again, I said like the last hour I really liked, and we can go ahead and talk about that whenever you'd like. But in that first 2 hours, I felt like they could have shed anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes of screen time. Like, seriously, I didn't need entire subplots of this movie. I didn't need to follow Hawkeye into Japan in what is probably the coolest shot of the movie, that cool one.
Okay, I was about to say, that was freaking awesome.
It was really well done. The problem is it was completely unnecessary. Like, they could have just told us he's gone rogue, we need to go find him. And then we could have...
No,
like,
you got to show that, man. Come on.
You don't have to
all
show
of
it.
A sudden,
just because it's a cool shot doesn't mean it's necessary to the telling of this movie.
I'm pretty sure it was. I'm pretty
sure Jeremy Renner is not necessary to the telling of any movie, Brad. Like, if we're being frank here.
Dude, I will agree with you about that with any movie. I actually liked Jeremy Renner this time through.
Unbelievable in this movie.
Yeah,
I took a note.
I was blown away by how moved I was by his performance.
I literally have a note in my notes on my iPhone that just says the Renner paradox. And that is where that is where you give the best performance of your career in a movie where everyone forgets you're in the movie.
Yeah.
He's so good in this, but like no one remembers Hawkeye from this movie.
And he wouldn't be good if he didn't have his like Japanese anime like manga scene where he's just like straight up murdering people. Mm-hmm. It's incredible.
It's the same thing with Hemsworth in this movie. And I think I gave Hemsworth a tiny bit of crap in our first Avengers review, where I said that he hadn't quite fully stepped into being the actor that he is today, because I think he's a phenomenal actor. And in this movie, they really let him show it with how truly broken and depressed this man is.
Mm-hmm.
And I also feel like there's the Hemsworth paradox going on here, too, where he's giving one of the best performances I've ever seen him give. And yet the script and the directors are trying to undermine his truly great character development with jokes and jokes at his expense and like undercutting what is a really good performance because of it. Like, did Thor need to be fat in this movie? And if he did need to be fat at the beginning, could he not have just like magically shed 50 pounds with his lightning? Like, the fact that they stuck with it through the whole movie and kept calling him Lebowski and stuff, like it got on my nerves after a while.
Oh, come on. Lebowski happened once and it's just a throwaway. Like, you can't tell me that Robert Downey Jr. didn't just ad lib that.
Well,
I don't even love Lebowski. That was a great one-liner.
I think my point, though, is ultimately, like, even at the end of the film, they're still making, like, Rocket Raccoon's like, come on, Tubby, let's get in the ship, you know? It's just like, at a certain point, you have to know when to pull back and let the emotional arc of that character kind of take over a little bit and stop undercutting it with these constant reminders of, like, but he's fat. Like, it just really throws off what Hemsworth is trying to do, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this, though, like, he has one of the most beautiful moments of the whole film when he sits with his mother.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no jokes. There's nothing undercutting it. Like, Rocket is off stabbing Natalie Portman off screen.
Yep.
And for me, that was one of my absolute favorite scenes.
Totally
of the film.
Agree.
Like, the message that they're conveying there about the importance of understanding who you are and living into who you are. There's so much going on there that I'm a huge fan of. And I don't think the joking through the rest of the film detracts from that scene being what it needs to be.
I think you're absolutely right, because that's the only scene where they're not trying to undercut it. Like, I guess what I'm saying is I wish they'd just given him a little bit more room and space to be the character that he was without constantly trying to like squeeze a joke in. The Marvel humor really did. And I think part of it too, Brad, is like in a movie with 80 characters from 10 different franchises where each film franchise has its own tone and visual language and like humor style. I got a lot of tonal whiplash in this movie. Like, whenever Thanos was on screen, I was like, oh yeah, like we're supposed to realize that this is a very menacing person, but they've been joking about him for the last 8 minutes. So I found myself really relieved at the end of the movie when Chris Pratt shows up, because I'd forgotten about Chris Pratt because he died in the last movie. And I'm not on like team I hate Chris Pratt. I actually really like Chris Pratt. If he had been in this movie the entire time, I probably would have just like thrown something at the television. It would have been too much of the Marvel-y humor.
You would have gotten up in the theater and like yelled at him to shut up.
No, that's enough, Chris Pratt.
Yeah, security. We got some guy screaming at the screen again.
I don't know, man. So before we go to break, am I just a cranky old man? Like, did the Marvel humor work for you? Did they tie it in well with the dramatic moments? Did you have moments of tonal whiplash?
Separately from everything else. Yes, Bob. You are a cranky old man.
That goes without saying.
It goes without saying. When it comes to this film specifically, I kind of think you are being a cranky old man. Like, once again, this is the culmination of Marvel. It's not the culmination of Lord of the Rings. Like, it's not like we suddenly got in Return of the King a John Woo action thriller with Aragorn, like I don't even know what, like sliding down the walls of Gondor with doves flying out behind him. Like, you get the same movie, just the next iteration of it, and I think that's what you get here. Like, to complain about Marvel humor in the Marvel movie feels like I don't know. Like, I guess I'll say this. It's never been your thing.
That's not true.
Honestly,
that's like,
never been my thing.
It's never been your thing. I have many times over defended Marvel humor on this podcast, and I think this is one of the areas.
This is the one time where you're like one step too far.
It's just
Russo's.
They go overboard with it, and I don't feel like they work it in organically the way that they do in other movies. Like Guardians of the Galaxy, I think, is a great example of how to do the Marvel humor as the tone of your movie. Mm-hmm. And it's really, really hard to have a movie that takes itself as seriously as this. Like, the superhero stories are just ridiculous on their face. They're just like, they are preposterous stories. And I think you have to have at least some level of self-awareness whereas this movie is like, it's not aware of its own preposterousness. It wants to be taken very seriously, but its way of trying to mimic self-awareness is, let's let these guys riff a little bit. And I just, like, every time that happened, it just threw me off, because it was like, okay, are they going to go back in time and try to save the world, or do we have to have like 8 more quips before we do that? It, like, I don't know. This movie has just never clicked for me on that level.
Yeah, I mean, I would challenge you to someday go back. I don't think that there's quite as many self-aware Marvel-style jokes as you are portraying there to be. Like, they did not stack up at the level that you are saying they do. I just don't think that they really affect the outcome of this movie. And I think it's because you have so many beautiful, quiet moments in the film. Like, I even think about when Scarlett Johansson is sitting there after everybody turns off their monitors and she's eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, which seems like a weird choice, but sure, go for it. And she just has this incredible moment of like, this is what's happened to me over the last 5 years. And she has a great conversation with, I think, is it Captain America?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Great conversation.
Absolutely.
And I guess that's what I'm saying is like, there are tons of those scenes scattered throughout this movie. And to me, the Marvel humor put in throughout just kind of gives you a reminder of where they're at as a organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I guess I would just push back and say the fact that those scenes are scattered is what I think is wrong with the movie. Like, either be self-aware in one direction of your own ridiculousness or be self-aware of how serious things are, like a Nolan movie. And I think
so you either want Taika to direct this or Christopher Nolan.
But see,
Dude,
give
could you imagine?
Taika Oppenheimer, and he makes the worst movie of all time. You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
you can't do both. So,
I just really want to see Taika playing the main guy who's like questioning Oppenheimer throughout the
but still dressed as Adolf Hitler from Jojo Rabbit. Yeah.
Yes.
Brad, real quick
100%.
before we go to break, I do just want to say, in that peanut butter sandwich scene, how great would it have been if Bradley Cooper as Rocket Raccoon had just popped right up and said, "Hey, you ladies like peanut butter sandwiches?"
It would have been better if he was like, she like threw it away and then he pops out of the trash can holding it.
All right, man, it's time for us to go to break. What do you say we try this Jim Beam?
Oh, Bob, you told me earlier that you wanted to get this episode, quote, over with, end quote. And here we are, 45-ish minutes in.
And we're on a roll,
This is a wild
baby.
trip, my friend.
Yep. All right, today we are checking out Jim Beam Straight Bourbon Whiskey, also known as Jim Beam White Label. It has come down to this, Brad. 250 plus episodes. We've never tried Jim Beam. We might as well save it for last. This is one of the best-selling bourbons in
Last, huh?
well, last of the season.
This is
This is it. We're done.
Podcast.
Yep, folks. This is the one.
You thought Last Jedi would end the podcast, but here we are.
This is one of the best-selling bourbons in the world, if not the best-selling bourbon in the world. It clocks in at 80 proof. It is a bottom shelf staple. Now, when we say bottom shelf, we don't necessarily mean bottom tier quality, but it is an affordable bourbon that people have used for decades as a mixer and neat. The mash bill on Jim Beam is 75% corn, 13% rye, and 12% malted barley. So almost an equivalent amount of rye and barley. This is a non-age stated bourbon. And Brad, I know that sometimes we kind of blow through our definitions on the podcast, but a lot of times people are listening for the first time and people don't know a lot about bourbon. And so we want people, especially people who are drinking Jim Beam, to understand what they're drinking here. What does it mean, Brad, when we say that a whiskey is non-age stated, and how do we know what the age is when that's the case?
Well, in order to be a bourbon whiskey, you have to be aged for a minimum of 2 years.
A straight bourbon. A straight bourbon.
Sorry. Thank you. A straight bourbon. And if they don't put an age statement on it, guess how many years old it is, Bob?
How many, Brad?
2.
No, false. Brad, you have learned nothing over the course of 8 seasons of this podcast.
Meh.
To be a non-age stated, God bless it, why do I throw to you? I try to give you like a lob, and you're like, nope, missed the dunk. In order to not have an age statement on the label, a bourbon has to be aged for a minimum of 4 years. Now, what that means is that the youngest bourbon in this blend, they take, barrels from all over the rick house and of all different ages and blend them together. The youngest whiskey here has to be 4 years or older. Otherwise, it has to be age stated. Now, you can have an age stated whiskey, like we talked last week with Jim Beam Black Label 7-year, where everything in that bottle is 7 years old or older. But a lot of times people don't want to advertise, hey, this is only 4 years old. So they just don't put anything on the label, and that's how we know that this is at least 4 years old, Brad. So with all that out of the way, this is our 5th week of Jim Beam. We have been very up and down on this, but I'm really looking forward to just sipping neat on regular Jim Beam bourbon. Brad, you've had it already. I have not. So why don't you give us your nosing notes here?
Yeah, the Jim Beam comes across with like dust of peanut. It's not quite a strong enough nose to
peanut.
Literally, yes. There's a little bit of caramel. It really reminds me of like a fizzy water that you can't place what flavor it is. It's just kind of a generic. There's something effervescent about it, but there's not a ton of notes here. I'm going to be generous. I will give it a 6 out of 10 on the nose.
Yeah, you know what? Last week with the Black Label and this week, I have found the noses much more pleasant. And I think it's just because they're leaning much more sweet. This definitely smells like cracking open a bag of peanuts at a baseball game. But if they were like doused in caramel and honey and a bunch of things, like it's really, really nice, man. You get peanut butter, you get brown sugar. I get maple on this. It's by far the most pleasant smelling of all 5 of these Jim Beams. I'm going to give it a 7.5 on the nose.
Yeah, I love that you called out maple, because that for me was the thing that bumped my taste score up. There's caramel, there's vanilla, there's a little bit of a peanutty note, but for me it was like a really nice, rich maple syrup on the front of the tongue that brought the score up decently. I'm at a 7 out of 10 on the taste.
Yeah, I like this a lot. This is like everything else that we've had from Jim Beam. I feel like their solution to let's come up with a higher end version of this is more years in the barrel, more oakiness, double oaking. And it has really thrown the balance off, tipping it into like almost bitterness. This has a lot of oak, and I can sense the rye and the barley here as well. But it is like syrupy sweet. I really, really love this. And for an 80 proof bourbon, it has so much going on the palate that I don't notice how thin it is, like I did last week with the Black Label. I think this is a significant step up from the Black Label, Brad. And I think, once again, I'm going to give it a 7.5 on the palate.
I think for me, the finish, it kind of falls back down to earth for what this whiskey could be. It gets really corn heavy on the end. The vanilla comes through. Just kind of has a generic sweetness to it, almost like a simple syrup. But there's not enough, of like classic peppery oak notes to get me super excited about the finish. So I'm back down to a 6 out of 10.
I'm with you on all of those notes, but I think that this is the first time where it hasn't been coupled with an intense bitterness. It's definitely an 80 proof bourbon, but it tastes like an 80 proof bourbon that they could charge more money for. Like Basil Hayden's, famously another Jim Beam product, is $40. I don't know that I'd be able to just immediately tell the difference between the two if you put them down, because they've been so diluted. But I also think this just has a really nice, well-rounded flavor profile. The finish feels like it's something that could stand up in a lower ABV cocktail. I like the oakiness of it. I like the spice, and that sort of maple caramel comes back a little bit on the back of the palate. So I'm going to give it a 7 once again here. And when it comes to balance, I said 7.5, 7.5, 7. That means this is a pretty well-balanced whiskey. Is it the greatest whiskey we've ever had? Absolutely not. But for a cheap blended bourbon with no age statement that like most people will pass by on shelves, I'm actually pretty blown away here. I think I'm going to give it an 8.5 on balance.
Yeah, I mean, I give it a 6.76. I'll give it a 7 on balance. I think that the flavors they're going for, they hit. There's just not any real variance of the notes here to make me excited about it. There's a lot of good stuff going on here. 7 out of 10 on balance. Bob, this bottle of whiskey is going to set you back $17 in the state of Ohio.
Oh, man. Do I love to hear that, Brad? Because do you know why I love to hear that?
Why is that, Bob?
Because this is a 10 out of 10 value. I'm staking my claim here. I'm putting my stake in the ground, Brad. This is the first one that I've had in this series of 5 whiskeys, including the single barrel, which cost like $30-something, that I understand why people like the Jim Beam palette. Like why that's their wheelhouse. We've had Bookers. We understand like what it's like on the high end. But people who go out and just buy Jim Beam products, this is the flagship product. And if they don't nail this, then everything else is kind of like, why would I want that? And I think that the fact that we ended with this one is really important, because this is the first time I've understood, okay, like I could get on board with this. I think they kind of got off track with the other 4 that we tried. And so for $17, like this is a freaking steal, man. I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, man, I'm just not with you on this. I'll give it a 7.5. It's $17. It's a decent pour. I think you can get a few other better pours for just a few bucks more. Good value. Like they've produced a solid whiskey, and they know what they're making. And I love when a large company can recognize that. I'm coming out to a 33.5 out of 50.
Yeah, I am significantly higher than you on this one, Brad. I'm at a 40.5 out of 50.
Get out of it, Bob.
Well, okay, like, listen, this is definitely skewed by my 10 out of 10 value, but I gave it a 30 and a half out of 40. Like, I think it's a 7.
Really high score.
I think it's a 7.5 whiskey across the board. But when you put that at a $17 price point, like, Brad, this is cheaper than any whiskey we've ever done on the show, except for maybe Benchmark. Like, I don't know what else you could possibly get at this price point, let alone something. Go ahead.
You've purged the Canadian mist from your memory.
I'm talking bourbon, but yeah, you're right. I don't know, man. I really, really liked it. It's clearly, of the 4 whiskeys I've given above a 42, it is clearly the worst of the 4. But if you're asking me, hey, I have $17 in my pocket and I want to spend all my money on whiskey, what should I get? I mean, what else can I steer you to besides this? It's really good.
Yeah, I mean, I came to a 26 out of 40, which is, a 65 out of 100.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they're doing good stuff here. I'm just a little softer than you on it, and that's totally okay, man. I am happy that you have something to rejoice in this here episode of Film and Whiskey.
I feel exactly how you do about the whiskey, but I feel it about the movie. Like, they're doing some good stuff here. It's just, this is not for me.
Yeah.
All right, dude. Well, that's Jim Beam. What do you say we get back into talking about Endgame?
Let's get to it. All right, everybody. That was Jim Beam, an American whiskey.
It certainly is. I always like how they refer to it as the James B. Beam Corporation.
Yes.
Like they're trying to spruce it up a little bit. It's like,
yeah, what is it with whiskey companies and having like middle initials?
I don't know. It reminds me of, have you ever seen the movie Joe Dirt?
No, I haven't.
Oh, an American classic. But at the beginning of the movie, he works on like a sound stage or something, and he has to show ID to get in, and he's the janitor. And he tries to spell his name with like an E with a little accent mark at the end. He keeps calling himself Joe Dirte. And the guy at the gate is just like, don't try to church it up, son. Don't you mean Joe Dirt? And that's exactly how I feel about these distilleries. It's like, James B. Beam, don't try to church it up. This is Jim Beam.
This cost me $17.
No, Brad, it cost me 99 cents because I got a 50 ml sample of it.
Yeah, you did.
All right, on that note, you know what time it is, Brad?
It's time for 2 Facts and a Falsehood.
Brad is gonna try to stump you, Bob, to alright and what is wrong. 2 facts and a falsehood.
2 Facts and a Falsehood is the part of the show where Brad presents me with 3 items as fact about the making of this movie, one of which is a complete lie. Once again, as with Star Wars, I do not care. You could present me with any number of statements, all of them true, all of them false. I have no idea. I did not read these things growing up. So, Brad, I'm sitting at 18-13 on the season. I have secured for myself my winning season. If I lose today, it is what it is. So hit me with your 2 facts and a falsehood.
Fact number 1. Upon reaching its peak gross, Endgame became the first film in 45 years to be the highest grossing film not directed by Steven Spielberg, James Cameron, or George Lucas. Fact number 2, Chris Evans developed an extraordinarily close relationship with his stunt double, Sam Hargrave, throughout the MCU experience, and insisted that in his credit scene, multiple of the background shots of Captain America are actually of Hargrave. Fact number 3, Robert Downey Jr. officially surpassed Hugh Jackman's record for most appearances in film as the same superhero with 10. He set this record in only 11 years, whereas Jackman did it in 17.
So Hugh Jackman has since reclaimed that crown, if that is true, or is he at least tied? Because I believe that Deadpool and Wolverine is his 10th appearance as Wolverine now.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's probably why Hugh did it. Definitely not for the paycheck.
Number 1, I believe, is true. The one about it being 45 years since Cameron, Spielberg, or Lucas hadn't had the highest grossing film. Because I'm trying to think, it was Jaws, and then it was Star Wars, and then I believe it was E.T., until it was Jurassic Park, and then it was Titanic, and then Titanic held the crown until Avatar, and then Endgame. Yeah, so I think that's right. Number 3 sounds true. Number 2, I wasn't really paying attention to, be honest with you. I don't really know who Hargrove is. But that's all I remember. But that's enough for me. It was so boring that it has to be false. Number 2 is the Falsehood, Brad.
You are correct, Robert.
Yeah!
Look at you go.
Just like this movie. Boring as hell.
Bob, you said that the final hour of this film worked for you. So let's dive into that a little bit. What was it about the final act of the Marvel Cinematic Universe that like just compelled you? What made you feel like, oh, I'm finally at a good movie?
You know that scene in The Grinch where he's sliding down the hill holding a sleigh full of gifts, and they say that his tiny heart grew 3 sizes that day?
I sure do remember that, yeah.
It was basically that, you know? I honestly got caught up in the movie making. I think that it just becomes a significantly more well-made movie. It feels less thrown together. I think the fact that they finally get everybody in one location means that they don't have to keep cutting back and forth to kind of dissolve or dilute some of the tension. And because of that, you know, the visual palette is still freaking awful. This movie is so gray. It just looks like crap. But even, I mean, getting beyond that, you get some cool little quips. You get some cool little moments of people flexing and like winking at the camera, but they all feel much more tied into the action on the screen. And I've said this a few times in the course of this season, when the humor in a movie feels kind of Spielbergian. And I think that that's what I mean by that is like Spielberg's really good at knowing where within a very tense action sequence he can drop a joke so that it does kind of like give you a moment to breathe, but it doesn't undercut the action of the sequence. And I think that the Russos do a really good job with that part of the movie. All the way up until Iron Man's sacrifice. And do I think that they really stretch it out, like both his death scene and the funeral scene? 100%. Like it is really dragged out. But that's one of those areas where
you didn't like the oneer slowly traveling through the groups of people?
I really tried this time to determine if they were actually all in one location or if they were all just like groups of 3 that they had green screened separately and put together. I couldn't tell. So it must have been good green screen if it wasn't. But
I think I remember being told that they shot that scene and told everybody that like,
yeah, I've heard
it was
that.
somebody
There's
else.
no way. You don't think they all wondered, like, why are we wearing black dresses and black suits? Like, nobody knew that 3-day funeral shoot wasn't a party scene.
I'm just saying that it would indicate to me that they were all actually there together.
Sure. Yeah. Anyway, like, they drag it out, but I think that's one of those areas where you can't just look at the movie in a vacuum. Like, this big MCU thing needs a half-hour-long tribute to Tony Stark. It just does. And I'm okay with it. And it really got me. Like, I always thought that I Love You 3000 was a really cheesy thing to say. And this time around, I was like, it freaking floored me, dude. I was just, ugh. If anything, I don't think they milked that moment enough. Because he says, I love you 3000, and then the thing cuts off. And it's like, oh, you really could have showed me Gwyneth Paltrow and his little kid crying. And
you wanted to watch like a 4-year-old kid just weeping.
Just freaking ruined. Yeah.
They should have had Jon Favreau stand above her and go, shut up.
Oh, dude. Speaking of which, Favreau, a very underrated actor.
He's so good.
That moment with the cheeseburgers, like of all the things that could make me cry, he has that look in his eyes and he chokes back the tears saying like, you know, your dad liked cheeseburgers. And I was like, he did. He did like cheeseburger.
He got Burger King at the end of the first movie.
Oh, man. So, yeah, I think the movie making gets significantly better in the last hour.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you, man. I think that the last battle is incredible. I think that as much as the color palette, which has been much maligned, it rears its ugly head in the battle, there are a few great moments where he gives you a wide shot of the entire battlefield. Mm-hmm. And you like, I'm thinking of the moment where Thanos is on the right, and it like everything is like these greens and purples, and like it looks like space itself has come to devour Earth. And it's just a great shot, man. And there's just a lot of moments like that where I love the end of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go out on a limb. I'll put myself out there, Bob, and say the one thing that drove me nuts about this movie, the first time I saw it, the second time I saw it, and the third time that I saw it. And the thing is, it's only a foretaste of what's to come with Disney. But like the one moment of the battle where they're like, let's group up all the women because women are powerful. Did you know that, Bob? I don't know if you knew this, but women are powerful and they can be superheroes too. And I'm just sitting there going, I'm not even a Marvel fan. And I know that Captain Marvel doesn't need anybody's help. Like they have well established. She don't need no man. She don't need no woman. She could easily break through all of these people together, but they had to have this one little moment. And it's like stuff like that for me is what draws me out of the movie. Like all the humor beforehand, all of the tonal whiplash, which does exist, doesn't bother me as much. Like all of that, totally fine. Makes sense. It's a Marvel movie. But that was the moment for me that, if I'm being honest, just completely rips me out of the movie and goes, oh, Disney's being Disney.
It really does feel shoehorned in. And I like the thing about it is it doesn't bother me so much because it's such a small moment in the movie. And also, like, you know what? I'm glad that like little girls in the audience had a moment like that where they could see all of their favorite heroes in one shot. The issue with it is that everything leading up to it, like, had all of the women scattered in different places on the battlefield and then conveniently
doing awesome stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. Like doing awesome stuff, being kick-ass. Like I am all about that. It's great. But you're right. They're all scattered across the battlefield, and all of a sudden they just all happen to be there ready to go.
And they're the only ones there. Yeah.
Yeah.
While we're talking about gripes, this is going to be my most, like, people who listen to this episode and don't know me are going to think that I'm like an asshole, but
I think they figured that out
a long time ago.
Yeah.
When Captain America has Mjolnir and all of the people come out of their little portals, and it's a really, really cool moment. Like, it just is. It's really cool. And then he says, Avengers, assemble. And everybody goes, yeah! that moment, you know? Yeah. Here's the thing. I understand that a lot of people refer to the first Avengers film, the one from 2012, as Avengers Assemble. Like that was an alternate title for that movie. So it's a reference to that. It makes no sense in the context of the movie because they have already assembled. They're there already. Like, why are you saying, like, he could have said anything. He could have said Avengers Avenge. Charge forward. Yes, anything. Avengers Assemble is the least pertinent thing to say in that moment. Like, everyone is there, Captain. Like, please just lead us into battle. It's always irked me. And I, like, now that we're just saying small gripes, I have to get it off my chest.
That is the silliest.
It's true. Think about it now in the context of what I just said. It's a dumb line, Brad.
I don't think it's a dumb line. I think it's a comic book line in reference to the comic books that these were all built upon. Like, I mean, sure, they're already assembled, but like,
well, what if he just said like, what if he said like Avengers, assembled? Like, we're here. We did it.
you know that would be so much worse.
All right, dude, we've barely talked about the cast of this movie, but we're running really long. This is one of those few IMDb pages where they show you the first 16 or 20 people in the cast list. And usually once you get through the first 4, like, actors don't have pictures anymore. They're just, you know, random people. It's all A-list stars all the way down. And so I just don't think we have the time to spend to talk about certain people in this movie. But, like, you know, we're talking Mark Ruffalo, Scarlett Johansson, Jeremy Renner. Like,
I think we really need to talk Evangeline Lilly as the Wasp. That's where we really need to dive in, Bob.
She's the one that I most just want to give a pat on the back to. Like, oh, you did it. You're here.
You did it. You made it in.
You made it in.
That's how I feel about Robin Scherbatsky.
Yeah, she's
in the
man,
first
she's
few.
really barely in it at the end of this movie.
Yeah, it's like, hey, you've made it. You did it. Good job.
Who among the cast do you want to call out before we get into Let's Make It a Double and final scores? We've talked about RDJ. We've talked about Renner. We've talked about Hemsworth. I think we both really like Chris Evans as Captain America. And they are smart enough to know who brought them here. Like, what's the saying? Like, dance with the person who brought you. Yeah. RDJ and Chris Evans get the most in this movie, and it's well-deserved. So, yeah, I don't know. Is there anybody else you want to mention?
No, I mean, I think Scarlett Johansson is incredible. I think that her sacrifice scene, you get to see like a Jojo Rabbit type ScarJo, where she gives a depth that you don't always get to see in her as Black Widow. So I love her. I think she's an incredible actress. But you're right, man. Like, the entire Marvel cinematic universe revolves around Captain America's view of the world and Tony Stark's. And so the fact that they really circle the wagons and give this final movie to the two of them, it feels proper. It goes to show for me something they learned with the Harry Potter franchise, which is like, when you're building this universe over a decade, they got really lucky with some of their castings.
They really did.
Like, the fact that Robert Downey Jr. completely revived his career because of this character. The fact that Chris Evans becomes such an incredible emblem of change from the first movie to the end, and yet he still holds on to certain core values. Like, there is so much that could have gone wrong in the casting of these films. There's a lot that could have gone wrong in the intervening years. Like, who knows what happens to people over a 11, 12-year span. But man, oh man, if they didn't get these two castings right from the start, this universe would have gone nowhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to the point where, like, you know, I want to put Thor and Hulk and all these people on the same plane and level as these two, but Thor was a franchise that was dead in the water, man. The first one didn't work. They tried something else with the second one, and a lot of people hate that one worse than the first one. It wasn't until Ragnarok and the Avengers films that people really started to appreciate Thor. And, like, thank God they were able to kind of reset that franchise, or else it would have been kind of this albatross around the rest of the MCU. But you're absolutely right that I don't think people give, especially Chris Evans, enough credit in bringing the MCU to where it got prior to the absolute cliff that it fell off after Endgame.
Well, I was just going to say, like, we can all agree that Marvel ended with Endgame. Like, I don't know how anybody at Disney thought to themselves, yeah, we can do this again. Like, I don't know. I just think that corporate America is so stupid in so many ways. Like, I'm not even opposed to them continuing on spin-off things like that, but to expect it to be the level of cultural impact that it once was is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. All right, Brad, with that final statement, I think it's time to get into our last segment of the day, which we call Let's Make It a Double.
We're near the end of the episode, so thanks for listening to the Film and Whiskey Show. Let's pair another film with this one, even if it's a struggle. It's our final segment of the day, now let's make it a double.
Let's Make It a Double is the part of the show where we pick a movie to pair up with this one to make the perfect double feature. Brad, I'm going to go first, and it's actually funny because I'm pairing this with a movie that is just coming out this weekend. We're recording this 2.5 weeks before the air date. So I'm talking about a movie called Deadpool and Wolverine. And my big caveat is that I have not yet seen this film. I am going to see it tonight after we record. However, I have read enough reviews and listened to enough podcast reviews of this movie now to hear that in most critics' minds, it is kind of the... You know how, like, Trump and Bernie Sanders are on opposite ends of the political spectrum, but they're kind of, like, really close in what they actually believe about the government and how it should be dismantled? It's kind of like that. Like, Endgame is on one end of taking itself too seriously. Everything I hear about Deadpool and Wolverine is that it is the most flippant movie, and it like actively, literally insults the audience to their face for even coming and says like, you'll feed whatever slop we give you. But then it gives them a bunch of cameos of people that have just been in superhero movies. And so they know people will eat it up. It's really cynical. And I know it's going to make $1.5 billion anyway. And I kind of feel like those are two sides of the same coin with this movie. I don't think this movie's quite as cynical. But I think that what Deadpool's doing, at least from everything I'm hearing, is kind of playing the Endgame card. So I think it would be really fascinating to watch these movies back to back. And that's kind of what I'm going to do tonight.
Bob, I'm curious. How often do you go into a movie actually blind?
I go into a movie, well, like blind, like I've never heard of this film.
I mean, with a basic level of information that an average person might have.
Like
seen one trailer.
98% of the time.
Really?
Yeah. I don't like to listen to reviews before I go into movies. Deadpool is one of those movies that like I don't really care about seeing, but I need.
So you're gonna go spend $12?
Well, I'm gonna spend
$0
on it because I get the Regal Unlimited pass. So I've already paid my money for the month. But it's the only thing coming out this week. So like I've seen everything else that's out. I might as well go see.
You're kind of stuck.
That's why I was like, yeah, I don't care what happens. Let's listen to these reviews.
Oh, that's funny.
All right, Brad, what's your let's make it a double here?
I think I'm going to go a more traditional route, and I am going to pair this with The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. On terms of scale, while I despise the CGI-ness of Marvel, I think that the final battles of Return of the King and the final battle of Endgame are just these massive, epic, super cool, beautifully shot, awesome action scenes. And I think that it would be a really fun it wouldn't even be a night of watching two movies. It would be an entire day. Because I believe we're looking at 6.5 hours minimum to watch those two films. So I think actually I might just be going for the record of longest double feature in film and whiskey history for Let's Make It a Double.
Yeah, you might as well just suggest the extended edition and make it a full 7.5 hours.
Yeah, go for it. It'd be a blast.
That's one word for it. All right, let's give this movie some final scores. Brad, I think I've actually pulled punches here on how much I truly hated the first 2 hours of this movie. I thought it was just, frankly, an amateurish movie. Like, I'm not saying that the CGI wasn't good in parts or that the acting wasn't up to par, but it was just so cobbled together, so wantonly thrown together and randomized, and like it blew my mind how incoherent the tone and the rhythm of this movie were. I was going to come in here and give it a 4 out of 10.
Ooh.
And that was being generous. And then the last hour happened, and the last hour is like an 8.5 to a 9 out of 10 for me. It's still not enough to redeem the whole movie. I think this is a significantly worse movie than Infinity War, a movie that I would give like an 8.5 to. I'm going to give Endgame a 6 out of 10, Brad.
Okay. That's up a decent amount from a 4. This movie's not a 4 out of 10, Bob.
No, it's not.
I am going to give this... I'll stick at an 8 out of 10. I'm close to an 8.5. I think that there are flaws with this film, but there's just so much that makes this a great end to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I think that's what this movie set out to do. And I think it accomplishes it. It starts off in a really emotional place. It ends in a highly emotional place. And it has all sorts of inane, funny, great action scenes in between. You know, even the moment where Captain America looks around and says "Hail Hydra" to the people in the elevator, like, there's just cool moments like that are really well done, that reward viewers for having been faithful to the franchise for a long time. And I also think that, like, on the level of story, this movie just got me, man. Like, I cried this time through watching this movie. The beauty of the dead coming back to life, like the idea of a resurrection, is just a really powerful moment in storytelling, whether or not it's undermined by time travel solving everybody's problems. Like, it's an incredible moment with an incredible visual. I think that the soundtrack throughout this film is really well done. They give you a lot of really good variations on the Avengers theme. They riff on it a decent amount. I just think there's a lot to love about this film. So I'll stick it an 8 out of 10, Bob.
Once again, I think that I would say conservatively half my notes did not get used in this episode, even though it's really long. But I have so many thoughts about this movie. I have so many thoughts about fan service movies and what it means that a movie gives you everything you expected, and whether that's necessarily a good thing. But then if it isn't a good thing, how do we know what a good movie is? Do you know what I mean? I've been thinking about this a lot, and how to differentiate a movie that does fan service versus a movie that is well made, and if those two things can coexist.
I was going to say, do those things have to be diametrically
No,
opposed?
I don't think they do, but I do think that it's worth talking about. And so, kind of like The Last Jedi, I think this is a prime candidate of a movie to open up a 3-hour podcast, for us,
Yeah.
Brad. I think I really would like to sit down and kind of pick some of this apart, because this is probably the best example of a movie like that I can think of. And I really love to explore some of that with you, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm glad you didn't give it a 0 out of 10.
Yeah, me too.
That would be,
I'm glad that
super
at least one of us is not petty and a bit level-headed. So, folks, that does it for Season 8 of the Film and Whiskey Podcast. We're ending with an average of a 7 out of 10 on Avengers Endgame, but we'd like to know what you think. So please, let us know how wrong I am. You can find us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, at Film Whiskey.
You forgot LinkedIn, Bob.
I forgot LinkedIn. Come be
on,
professional and find us on LinkedIn.
Why are we on LinkedIn?
I don't know.
If you want to join the conversation, if you want to talk with like-minded people who enjoy movies and whiskey and all sorts of other things, you can join the conversation on our Discord server. There's a link to that at the end of every single one of our show notes.
Next week, we will be back closing out Season 8 in earnest with our Bracket Challenge, where we put all 32 movies into a seeded, tournament-style bracket, eliminating each of them from existence until only one film is left, and that will be crowned the champion of Season 8. Brad, I really can't wait. Those are my favorite episodes of every season. I'm super pumped to get into those with you next week, man.
Yeah, it's going to be an absolute blast, Bob. I cannot wait to crush your hopes and dreams.
As always. So join us next week for the Bracket Challenge. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.